It is 3 a.m. in New York, 10 in Kiev, and 4 on a Friday afternoon here in Seoul. I'm Moon Gun-young. You're watching ARIRANG Korea's only global network. Now, the search for the missing passengers of the sunken Sewol-ho ferry continues, as does the investigation into what caused this vessel to capsize. Let's go straight over to our Kim Ji-yeon. She has been following this story closely from the very beginning. Ji-yeon.
Well, Kon-young, the investigative team says it has found evidence that proves the de facto owner of the ferry operator, Yoo Byung-eun, was active in the management of the Chonghaejin Marine Company. Prosecutors say the ferry operator paid Yoo around $9,800 a month in wages and consultation fees from March 2013 up until February this year. Up until now, Yoo has denied his involvement in the management operations of the ferry operator, and to prove that he was liable for the ferry sinking, authorities had to work their way up and uncover evidence that he was actively involved with the company itself. Now that the authorities have obtained evidence that suggests he was, prosecutors are expected to charge him for company mismanagement in upholding safety standards. They plan to summon Yoo for questioning next week.
Right, Ji-yeon, and anger among the victims' families is growing now. Some led a march to the presidential palace of office of Chonghaejin this on Thursday night, actually. And this morning, I believe they're still demanding to meet the president. What's the latest?
You're right, Kon-young. The families there want a face-to-face meeting with President Park Geunhye to discuss their grievances, but that request has not been granted, but they were met by the President's Office Chief of Staff.
We want to resolve this by having a conversation. You have no idea how long we've been waiting here.
The request made by the families also had something to do with the remarks made by the news bureau chief at Korean Broadcasting System, or KBS, Kim Ji-yeon, who just several hours ago offered to resign from his post. Kim is alleged to have made comments that downplay the scale of the Sewol-ho ferry disaster, saying that the number of people killed in the ferry sinking pales in comparison to the number of people who die in traffic accidents every year. I'll be back with more updates later today.
And as the nation continues to mourn the loss of so many lives in the ferry disaster, weak consumer sentiment triggered by the tragedy has raised a red flag on the country's economic recovery. And to address this problem, President Park Geunhye presided over an emergency ministerial meeting earlier this Friday where she finalized a set of measures that are designed to quell concerns. Now, they include plans to spend an additional 7.8 trillion won, about $7.6 billion during the first half of the year to prop up domestic demand hit hard by weakened consumption in the wake of the ferry accident. The government will also expand the use of the central bank's lending facility for smaller firms to support affected businesses. Now, shifting our focus, a U.S. congresswoman is calling for the historic conflict surrounding Japan's wartime sex slavery to be addressed. She says avoiding the issue only will intensify regional tensions and throw the Obama administration's East Asia policy out of balance. Our Park Ji-yeon has this report.
U.S. Congresswoman Loretta Sanchez, the most senior female member on the House Committee on Homeland Security and the House Armed Services Committee, has warned that if historical conflicts in East Asia centering on Japan's wartime military sex slavery aren't settled quickly, it could disrupt the Obama administration's Asia rebalancing strategy. Sanchez made the remarks Thursday during a session of the House Armed Services Committee, according to a report by Seoul-based Yellen news agency, quoting diplomatic sources in Washington. The congresswoman said the sex slave issue has an inseparable relation to the U.S. government's Asia rebalancing strategy, which aims to strengthen political, economic, and security ties with Asian countries. She went on to say historic conflicts could weaken trilateral relations and the military alliance between the U.S., Korea, and Japan. She also stated that insensitive remarks by Japanese politicians hinder economic, political, and military cooperation among the three countries. Some prominent Japanese officials have claimed military sex slaves were necessary, or the victims were not forced into the slavery but were prostitutes. She added President Obama's recent remarks that Japan's wartime program of sexual slavery was a terrible violation of human rights should be understood in the context of trilateral cooperation. Visiting Korea late last month, the U.S. leader criticized Japan's wartime program of sex slavery, saying it was a terrible, egregious violation of human rights, and the past is something that has to be recognized honestly. Park Geunhye, ARIRANG News.
Recognized.
When the latest news meets the latest business stories, we give you a bigger and better picture of the world. Business Today with Moon Gon-young. Every weekday, only on ARIRANG.
Global awareness is firming up on the Nigerian government's struggle to contain the Islamic militant group Boko Haram, and residents of the latest known town to fall victim to Boko Haram's attacks are blaming security forces for failing to protect them. Our Shin Se-min reports.
In the latest evidence that the Nigerian government is losing its battle against the Islamic militant group Boko Haram, at least 50 bodies have been recovered in the Nigerian town Gamboru, victims of an attack carried out by Boko Haram. Surviving residents of the town say the death toll is more than 300, while government officials say the number is likely closer to 100. Residents of the town say they were bombarded by an assault that lasted 12 hours and lobbed criticism against security forces for failing to protect them. Most of the bodies found were burned so badly that they're beyond recognition. It's the latest in a series of violent acts carried out by Boko Haram. Last month, they abducted more than 200 girls and young women from a boarding school in the northeast of the nation. That sparked accusations that the government of Nigeria isn't doing enough to stop the extremists, which are blamed for killing more than 1,500 people so far this year as part of their drive to impose Islamic law on the country. Experts say if the hundreds of Nigerian kidnapped girls are not rescued soon, they could face a life of agony as slaves or child brides sold in markets across the globe. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
Now, on a different note, you may have noticed yourself feeling different during different times of the day, sometimes for no apparent reason. But there is a reason, and local researchers believe they have found it. Our Kim Ji-yeon reports.
In this experiment, mice are exposed to the smell of their predator. Drowned in fear, one mouse backs off and tries to find a way out. However, when a particular protein is removed from the mouse's brain, it reacts differently. A second mouse faced with a similar situation balls up and shivers where it stands. This time, the experiment shows how the mice react in a critical situation. The first mouse knows that it cannot come out of the test tube and slowly reduces its amount of movement. The second mouse, whose protein is not working properly, continues to fight for its life. The reverb alpha is a protein that is related to this change in emotions. Korean researchers have found that this protein controls dopamines, which are neurotransmitters that control brain functions related to emotions.
If the reverb alpha is completely gone, it breaks down the system to control the dopamine, meaning that high levels of dopamine will be maintained. And this is when illnesses like bipolar disorders appear.
The protein is also released in different quantities during different parts of a day. The researchers say this is why people may be prone to mood swings at certain hours of the day, whether they be mornings or evenings.
The amount of dopamines is important, but I think that the sort of rhythmic vibrations that are shown depending on whether it's day or night is much more important physiologically.
The researchers believe that if they can control this protein, they will be able to create new medication to treat various emotional disorders, such as depression and panic disorders. The findings have been published in the online edition of the science journal Cell. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
Korea's central bank has left its key rate unchanged at 2.5% for the 12th straight month in May, as there are signs that Sewol-ho ferry disaster has slowed consumer spending. Well, following its monthly monetary policy meeting Friday, the Bank of Korea said the economy at home and abroad is on a moderate pace of recovery. It will, however, closely monitor the impacts the ferry disaster could have on the domestic economy. Bank officials also note a risk coming from emerging markets due to the U.S. Federal Reserve's stimulus tapering and the strong local currency. The nation's inflation rate ran below the BOK's target band for the 23rd straight month in April, standing at 1.5%. No timetable, says the U.S. Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen. Now, she was referring to a tapering of its bond-buying stimulus program, saying it will likely take up to 8 years for it to return to its pre-crisis levels. Yellen said no decision has been made on the central bank's swollen portfolio of assets, which has ballooned from $800 billion in 2007 to $4.5 trillion today. The Fed chair also said the central bank could sell off accumulated mortgage-based bonds and stop reinvesting funds on expired assets, which in turn will run off the balance sheet naturally. Now, 3 rounds of asset purchases were made to stimulate the economy there in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. Still unsatisfied, the Fed is adding $45 billion in bond purchases every month. Back here in this country, the import auto industry enjoyed a strong month in April. And according to the Korea Automobile Importers and Distributors Association Friday, 16,700 automobiles rolled off new car lots last month, which is a more than 25% increase from the same month last year. Now, it continues a trend that began with the start of 2013. In the first 4 months of the year, import car sales are up 26.6% in the country on year. The most popular choice among foreign car buyers in April was BMW, followed by Mercedes-Benz and Volkswagen. Well, Korea's most recognizable brand is also one of the most desirable companies to work for in the world, and this is according to a human resources firm based in the Netherlands. Randstad ranks Samsung Electronics as the 3rd most preferred workplace among global job seekers, behind only BMW and Sony. Now, the firm surveyed roughly 200,000 students in 23 countries from September to December of last year. 86% of them were aware of Samsung Electronics, and over 57% said they wanted to work for that firm. Respondents from Canada, Hong Kong, and France had the most favorable view of Samsung, naming it the most attractive workplace in the world. One of President Park Geunhye's main campaign pledges when she was running for office was to provide a monthly pension allowance to all senior citizens, regardless of their income level. Now, after months of political wrangling over the bill, a revised plan is set to come into effect on July 25th. For a look at who will benefit from the plan and the lingering concerns that surround it, here's our Kwon So-ah.
From big expectations to major disappointments, and now over to hope. The Welfare Ministry began detailed preparations on Thursday for a highly disputed basic pension bill that was approved by the National Assembly last week. President Park Geunhye had earlier pledged that all seniors over the age of 65 would receive around $195 a month in pensions. But the revised version will only allow those in the bottom 70% of the income bracket to receive an amount ranging from between $98 and $195 based on other supplemental income.
I like the basic pension plan because I think in respect to our economic growth rate, our welfare system is lagging behind.
While some believe it's fair that only low-income seniors will benefit, others are discontent over the narrow guidelines that determine who qualifies as a recipient.
We had big hopes in the election pledge, but after the revisions were made, we were very disappointed. Just because we own a house, we are not able to receive the basic pension.
Kim Sang-un and his wife have no income. There are doubts about whether the new pension plan will help much, as experts say Korea's pension is still too low compared to other developed countries. Korea has the highest poverty rate among the elderly out of OECD nations, and its population is aging at a rapid pace as well.
In 2050, the elderly will make up 40% of the whole population. If 14 to 15 million seniors are paid such a low pension, most of them will live in poverty as society will not be able to support them.
Some sociologists expect that sooner or later the public will demand that pensions increase. However, the original plan was revised because of the strain it would have posed on the state's finances. For that reason, many believe the basic pension plan as it is now is the best possible option. Kwon So-ah, ARIRANG News.
As more details emerge from the investigation on the Sewol-ho ferry accident, it's becoming clearer that the factors behind the catastrophe go far beyond individual errors or even a lack of safety standards. Let's take a closer look. For that, our regular contributor, Dr. Kim Bokjoo, joins us live in the studio. Good afternoon to you, Dr. Kim.
Good afternoon.
Now, as the probe unveils more factors in various sectors of the Korean society, we are learning that personal ties between government officials and the industry or whatnot may have potentially contributed to the lax enforcement of safety standards.
That's right. That's what we are learning. There are a lot of private and public organizations involved with the shipping-related safety here in Korea. To mention just a few, Hankook Seongup, what we call here in Korea, Korea Registry of Shipping. This is a non-profit organization having to do with ship classification. This is an organization that is supposed to certify safety equipments such as lifeboats, how they're operating, and the balancing water tanks, whether they're operating properly or not. This was the organization that said actually certified that Sewol's case, all these were operating properly. This organization is being headed by former Marine Affairs official. And there are other organizations such as Korea Shipping Association, which is in charge of making sure that overall cargo shipments loading itself is not excessive. And they said in this case it was okay, and then now it turned out to be not the case. This organization is once again being headed by former Marine Affairs official. A whole bunch of port authorities here in Korea, as well as Korean shipping safety technology authorities and a whole bunch of other organizations. Actually, 11 out of 14 such organizations are being currently headed by Marine Affairs, ex-Marine Affairs Ministry officials. What's the problem with this? The problem is government and authorities are supposed to inspect all these organizations about their proper working. But when you have your former colleagues actually heading this organization or your former boss heading this organization, you can be really tough in terms of demanding perfection and meeting the requirements for meeting the safety requirements and all that kind of stuff. So it's very difficult. Your ex-boss or colleague will say, well, you trust me, right? So we're doing the proper job. Let's stop right here. Often that's accepted. That's why a lot of people are saying this kind of human network might have actually contributed to causing this kind of big tragedy.
Well, perhaps there is something to do with the Korean culture as well, where you're supposed to, I suppose, obey to your seniority in terms of age and whatnot.
And trust and all that
trust
kind of
as
stuff,
well. But of course, this is nothing new. We knew all along that there is such ties that could potentially compromise the rule of law or even principles are very pervasive in different sectors of the society.
That's so true. Recently, not having necessarily to do with the ex-government officials, but for example, in the case of nuclear power plants, we heard all along about this nuclear scientists, former, people who are trained as a nuclear scientist forming this kind of group and actually committing all these wrongdoings about certifying the safety, violating safety standards and just look away from their fellows doing kind of wrongdoings and all that kind of stuff. We called it nuclear power mafia here. And also in the legal community, these former judges who are becoming defense lawyers, defending their clients. And this was the case for so-called imperial prison labor case in Gwangju, where the defense lawyer himself was the head of this the local court previously. And so we've been hearing enough about that. But also, in addition to that, going back to the question of ex-officials taking positions in these businesses, we know so well in Korean financial industry, for instance, there's so many former finance ministry officials sitting on top of the key organizations such as Korea Exchange, Camco, KDIC, Korea Housing Finance Corporation, and all that kind of stuff. Many of them, they're the total majority in financial world, and also former officials at the Financial Supervisory Commission taking up all these positions. We are very much familiar with this case. But that doesn't end with the financial sector, but also all industries, industrial associations currently being headed by former industry ministry, and also different organizations of construction-related businesses being headed by former land ministry officials and all that. This is so much of a familiar story here.
Right. I suppose it was a long embedded problem in the society, and it has really come into the highlight because of this ferry disaster.
Right.
Now, we know that this is not a problem unique to Korea.
Right.
If that is the case, why is it so controversial here?
That is a big question, because in Washington, D.C., where I spent earlier part of my career, I'm so familiar with these cases in Washington where all these industry associations are actually being headed by former government officials or congressional staff. It's a widely practiced norm in Washington. Actually, recently they introduced a law banning former congressional staffs taking up these kind of positions for a certain period of time. So it's a big problem in Washington. In U.S. Treasury Department, heads of this Treasury, Secretary of Treasury, it has become a tradition that these people come from the finance ministry and financial sectors, and then they go back to financial sectors. So it's a widely practiced. In Japan, amakudari is a term set for the what we call here in Korea parachute appointment. So it is all practiced big time in other countries as well, but here in Korea, I suppose it has something to do with the level of trust, overall public trust in this society, which seems to be lacking, and overall, elite pools that we have in this society, where we seem to be having a higher level of concentration of this kind of dominance.
So I suppose the big question is, what can be done about this here in Korea? I mean, can we stop the practices as the public opinion wants, or what are the challenges ahead?
Yeah, almost it sounds like a public opinion here in Korea seems to be demanding this practice to be stopped overnight. But I don't think that's going to be possible. This is a society where we have seen high concentration of elites actually entering the government and building their career for a long period of time. So when these organizations try to find actually their bosses, their top bosses, their heads of this organization, actually step of this organization want ex-government officials, because these are the people who have better channels of communication with the government, which is so important in this society. Government makes so many different kind of important decisions here. So this is old practice. This is not going to be overcome overnight. What we can do is try to focus on expanding elite pools, going over and beyond the boundary of government, and hopefully hoping that we will get to find more competent elites in private sectors as well, going beyond the boundary of government.
Or a practice that if you stick to the principles, really you will get by, rather than you having to know officials or within the government.
That's so true.
Right, that kind of practice.
Tough for monitoring.
Right. If that becomes more prevalent in the society, I suppose this practice really could be scrapped for good.
Greater openness.
All right, Dr. Kim Bokjoo, thank you so much for today and all of this week. We'll see you next week.
Okay.
Today is a warm and sunny day nationwide with highs of up to 24 degrees in some regions. Now, there are some light layers of fog making it look like a cloudy day, but those will clear out by the end of the day. Now, the huge temperature gaps remain though, and we are looking at differences of more than 10 degrees between the days and nights, so make sure you are prepared for that. Now, going over to our temperature readings, Seoul will top out at 24 this afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Gwangju and Busan will peak up to 26 and 22 degrees. Now, moving over to other regions, Jeju Island tops out at 22, Dokdo peaks at 17, while Mount Kumgang tops out at 9. Now, as for the weather conditions in Chindo, they're looking better than yesterday. However, today is the last day of the neap tide period, which means the currents in the area will grow stronger starting tomorrow, making the search efforts more difficult. Well, that's all I have at this moment. I'm Michelle Park Geunhye. Back to you, Kanyang.
And that is your business today on this Friday. Thank you for watching. Do join us again at 6 p.m. Korea time on Early Edition at 6.